Hello and welcome to my Inktober 2019 story read, where I am reading the story I created during Inktober 2019. So tuck yourself in bed and let's read the story. Red Eyes, Part 1. Why did I start with her name? Okay. Anthea Samuel Hera Gregoria Moria Fatha Foricia is the name of the protagonist in this story. People say her stories are just as interesting as her name. Oh, did I not mention? That's her name, but most people call her Aunt for short. But I can't imagine why. Of all the curious trinkets she has found adventuring, her mother's ring is her prized possession, but more on that later. Aunt is a tough cookie. She's strong-willed, confident, and has a way of making peace with anyone, even the local boys in her neighborhood. They're all a year older than her, but they quickly learned that she was the leader of the bunch. Most of the adults call them mindless, but Aunt likes to call them loyal. She doesn't go on a single adventure without them. Some of them even call her the Ant Queen. One of her favorite activities between adventures is fishing. Aunt likes to call this thinkin' time. That's what her dad calls it, but the boys don't understand it. They find the activity boring, but the early morning bait collecting is their favorite part, so they stick around until they get hungry and run off to their homes for lunch. However, today they decided to stick around. Maybe there was something in the air, or maybe it was the cookies Aunt brought, freshly baked by her beloved grandmother. This is where the story starts to get interesting. What Aunt's loyal followers don't know is that there is more to this activity than fishing. To get to the lake, they must cut through the Black Forest, home to the rare ink sprout, which only grows in this location. This jet black plant seeps what looks like ink. Most people think this plant ugly and avoid it, calling it bad luck that only brings death. But Aunt disagrees. If she's lucky enough to spot one, she picks it. Wherever she is, she will freeze for what feels like hours to her, but in reality is only a second, so short that her friends don't even notice. What she sees varies from time to time. Once she saw a world full of shadow creatures. Other times she saw the future, but mostly it was an abstract mess she could barely comprehend. Most call Aunt a creative storyteller when she tells them about the ink sprout. Her grandmother believes every word, assuring Aunt there is much to learn about the ink sprout, her mother's ring, and the twin she wore as well. Aunt always asked her grandmother to tell her these secrets, but always got the same response.
The ink sprout will let you know when it is time.
As Aunt walked through the forest, she spotted the plant and swiftly picked it. Suddenly, she was home. It wasn't unusual for the ink sprout to take her somewhere she knew. Usually it meant she was going to see the future. A loud crash caused her to swivel around, looking down the hall to her grandmother's room, where a hand, black as night, fell just through the doorway. That's when she noticed the ring. It was her grandmother. Aunt came to, drenched in sweat, not knowing when the future would become reality. She ran straight home, leaving her friends behind. Anyone would react the same way Aunt did if they saw something happen to their grandmother, but the two were especially close. Aunt's mother died when she was very young, so young she didn't have a single memory of her, only her ring. She has worn her mother's ring ever since her finger grew into it. She remembers trying it on every day for years, hoping her finger somehow bulked up overnight. She even ate herself sick trying to gain weight just to fit into it. What made this ring so special? Aunt didn't know, but her life has changed ever since she started wearing it. The ring's appearance was nothing special. Pure black that didn't even reflect light. It was so thin you would think it was ink drawn on her finger. Sometimes Aunt would spend rainy nights listening to the radio while staring at the ring as if in a trance. She could have sworn she even saw it change to white, or even rainbow colored. But when she told her grandmother, she just winked at her. Aunt would frown from the lack of reason. What made the ring even more mysterious is that grandmother seemed to keep its secrets hidden from Aunt's father. Anytime he was caught eavesdropping on them, grandmother would give him a stern look and tell him, "Girls only," which made him think she was just trying to cheer Aunt up from her mother's passing, so he didn't ask any questions. The rings have been in the family for generations, passed down to the eldest daughter, with a match for the mother, until it got to Aunt. Aunt rounded the street corner halfway home when something caught her eye. It was a black figure hiding behind a bush. She almost didn't notice it because of how well it blended into the shadows, but the glow of the eyes gave it away. Its build was similar to a fox. No wait, a dog. Well, she wasn't sure what it was and didn't have time to investigate. She had to get home, fast. As Aunt took the last turn onto the road that led to her house, she heard the engine of a car start, followed by sirens. Her heart sunk to her stomach. That is, if her stomach was located at the center of Earth itself. She just managed to collect herself to step off the road as the ambulance flew past her as in slow motion. She stood there unable to move, to think, or even barely breathe. It felt like time had stopped, until she felt an embrace. Her father was husky and gave the best hugs, but even the best hugs can't stop tears. It wasn't much longer that Aunt's father got a call from the hospital that her grandmother had passed. Aunt lay in bed listening to her father on the phone and heard him exclaim,
"Ink? Impossible!"
followed by,
"What do you mean you can't diagnose why her skin turned black?"
and then the sound of the phone being slammed down. That night, Aunt's father tried to cheer her up by making her favorite meal, squid ink spaghetti. But she didn't have an appetite. Instead, she just wanted to lay in bed. More specifically, her grandmother's bed. She walked down the hallway and opened the door to her room. Everything was left exactly how it was before, when she realized she had never been in her room before. It wasn't that she wasn't allowed, she just never felt the need to. The two spent most of their time in the yard together. She took one step into the room when she immediately noticed the potted ink sprout in the window. She had never seen anyone actually caring for one of these plants before. This one even looked slightly different than the ones she saw in the forest. It almost had an enchanted glow about it. Aunt also noticed grandmother's bed was slightly askew. Maybe it was pushed during whatever commotion it caused the crash she heard in the future vision. Aunt straightened the bed, then hopped into the covers. They smelled like grandmother, which caused Aunt to tear up. Aunt's father entered the room with the offer of company if she was feeling lonely. Aunt shook her head, thanking him for the offer, and explained that she just wanted to be alone. With a kiss on her forehead, Aunt's father slipped out of the bedroom. The quiet of the night was too silent for Aunt, leaving her with nothing but her thoughts of her grandmother and how much she already missed her. Aunt buried her face in the pillow with a crunch. Wait, pillows don't crunch. What was that sound? Aunt shot up and surveyed the room. The ink sprout was casting an unsettling shadow across the room that startled her for a moment. She continued to look when, crunch, scrape, scratch. Aunt jumped off the bed and put her ear against the floorboards. Scratch! Her heart skipped a beat as she scrambled up from the floor and turned on the lights. Staring at the floor beneath the bed, she couldn't help but notice one of the boards was older and more frail than the others. She pushed aside the bed and began to lift it. Before Aunt could even lift the board a foot from the floor, the darkness from within jumped out at her. She tried to swing her arms to catch her balance, but she fell flat on her back with a weight on her chest. Aunt squinted, frantically trying to adjust to the darkness she was now surrounded by when she realized it wasn't dark at all. Craning her neck back, she realized there was a creature sitting on top of her, just inches from her nose. Its fur was so black she couldn't see fur, but what looked like a pattern of brushstrokes. She took one look at its glowing red eyes and realized this was the same creature she saw in the bushes earlier that day. The creature jumped off of Aunt and down through the hole that used to be covered by the floorboard, poking its head back up as if to say, "Follow me." Aunt, being an experienced adventurer, knew she was going to need a few things before she went jumping into any dark and mysterious places. She quietly snuck into her room, spotting her father asleep on the couch, and grabbed her bag with a few essentials. A flashlight, it looked dark in there. Her traveler's notebook and favorite pen for mapping, which were already full of meadows, forests, and snow-topped mountains. Jars for collecting samples, you never know what you'll find. And of course, snacks. Yum. Aunt returned to her grandmother's room where the creature was waiting patiently next to the hole and jumped right in. Aunt was hesitant, and then followed. She landed on her feet with a hard thud and looked up. The board hinged in the floor, now ceiling, was now closed. The room was completely black, so she took out her flashlight to reveal an art studio. No, a garden. Well, it was both. All around her were ink sprouts and drawings from floor to ceiling. The biggest piece was a shadowy figure of a dragon flying over a village between two mountains. The piece spanned the length of the entire room, and Aunt couldn't take her eyes off of it, until her new little friend she had forgotten about let out a scratchy growl. Walking over to where the creature was, Aunt noticed it was sitting upon an absolutely massive book. The cover was decorated with intricate inked details, and its pages were worn and stained with blotches of ink and fingerprints that Aunt could only assume were her grandmother's. Some pages even had an ash-like quality to them, suggesting they had been burned. Aunt anxiously eyed the drawing of the dragon on the wall. She fought back the tears as she put her hands over the fingerprints and took a deep breath, opening the book using all of her weight. Nothing could have prepared the adventurer and Ant as she opened the cover to reveal hundreds of pages of notes on another world she didn't even know existed. She spent the better half of the night reading up on the Knee, the black fox-like creature, and what inhabited it. She studied the maps her grandmother charted, the language of the Knee, and even learned about the ink sprouts and how it had been taking her successors to this world all of these centuries. And it was all thanks to the ring. Ant finished reading the book in full. She's a fast reader, and decided it was time to enter the kingdom of Savnak to take care of the business her grandmother was in the middle of. It was going to be dangerous, but Ant had to finish this not only for her mother, but for her grandmother, her great-grandmother, her great-great-grand... You get the idea. Ant took the tip of a nearby ink sprout in hand and squeezed it, causing her hand to go black, and her ring became one with her flesh. Almost by instinct, she placed her hand upon a nearby canvas with a landscape in black ink, and everything went black. The darkness faded, as if the blink of an eye, and Ant was now standing in front of the mountains she once saw in ink. After taking a moment to process what just happened, she was once again reminded of her task by the growl of her new knee friend, and headed inside the overgrown cave before her. She had a queen to visit. Inside the dark cave were carvings etched into the walls of all the adventures, the lore, and the legend of the Knee Ant read about in her grandmother's notes. There were discoveries, battles, celebrations, and disasters. As Ant went deeper into the cave, she started to see a light in the distance, as well as hear the faint sounds of a low, rumbling growl. Her new friend started to grumble to herself when Ant realized she had never asked his name now that she was able to speak some Kneevish. The Knee responded with a growl, which Ant translated as Eider. Ant held out her hand for an official introduction and handshake, but Eider only cocked his head for a moment before licking her hand and running ahead. Ant smiled and rubbed her hand. The creature's tongue was cold and left a bit of black saliva. Ant continued deep into the cave where more and more guards of Knee began to line the walls of the cave. Instead of looking her in the eye, they seemed to be focused on her hand, or rather, her ring. The deeper they went, the more weapons that were drawn by the guards, and the more sounds came from deep within. There was a roar so sudden and loud that it brought Ant to her knees. She hesitated, ears covered, and then looked at Eider, who trotted ahead with confidence, so she followed. It wasn't much longer that they approached a door so tall it faded into the shadows of the cave's ceiling. The guards crossed their spears, stopping them from entering, when Eider suddenly and gently grabbed Ant's hand in his mouth and held it up to the guards. They let out a growl and the doors opened, shaking the entire cave. It was just as Ant had read in her grandmother's notes. The Queen of Knee was infected, as if she were wild. She was chained down to her throne as the guards struggled to control her. Eider ran up to the advisor and talked for less than a minute, but neither took their eyes off of Ant. The advisor handed a scroll to Eider, and he took it between his teeth with a bow. He quickly turned tail out of the cave, nipping at Ant to signal her to follow. Ant could barely keep up, but saw the red glow of Eider's eyes as he often made sure he wasn't going so fast she fell behind. Once outside, Ant dropped to the ground, gasping for breath, and then started laughing hysterically when her jaw dropped. Eider was now standing on two legs, shifting into a more humanoid figure. "This is going to be so much fun!" he exclaimed, wrapping his new arms around stunned Ant. Part 2. Eider was orphaned as a newborn Knee, abandoned by his parents for having red, glowing eyes. To a human, they may look like an ornament, adding to the mystery and beauty of this creature, but this color means nothing but danger and misfortune in his world. Growing up without parents was the first of many problems in Eider's life so far. Growing up as the misfit in his world only made his curiosity of the humans stronger. For the most part, the Knee don't particularly like to associate with the humans. They find them disgusting. The exception being the wearer of the rings. The Knee created just 3 rings to allow a small number of humans into their world at a time. Knowing the destruction the humans were capable of, they wouldn't dare put their world at risk. Eider was raised by Ant's grandmother, who found him hours after his parents abandoned him in the middle of a forest she had been exploring. She often brought him trinkets from the human world. Ant's old toys and various snacks were his favorites. All human items were forbidden by the Queen, but because they refused to take him in, they didn't interfere. He had heard all about Ant from her grandmother and couldn't wait to meet her, often shape-shifting, which was a rare gift thought to be cursed, into the form of a child and pretending she was there. Until now. Ider squeezed Aunt as hard as he could until she was coughing and gasping for air. He let go of her, laughing from happiness, but also in tears. He was happy crying. Happy he finally had a friend his age he could explore with, but also sad. Aunt was young, but still very much reminded Ider of her grandmother, or rather, his mother, who he missed just as much as Aunt did. "Oh, right." Ider picked the scroll up off the ground that was dropped when they embraced, and handed it to Aunt. "Sling this into your bag. You never know when you might need it. This is a letter from the Queen. Well, the Queen's advisor, since the Queen is..." Ider trailed off and looked at the ground. "It's a letter of acceptance," he said, perking up. "Usually there's a ceremony allowing you into our world, but there's no time. Now every knee will know you're not like other dumb humans." He may have been raised by Aunt's grandmother, but the general feeling towards humans by the knee still rubbed off on him, despite the way he was treated. "The Queen was poisoned by our enemies, the Resair, and there's only one cure. The guards of Knee don't think it's worth the risk if the ring wearers are around, and if you say no, they'll take your ring away. Please!" Ider's eyes teared up. "Please, don't let them take your ring away. And be careful. I don't want you to, like your grandmother." Ider started crying. Aunt reached inside her backpack and pulled out a homemade cookie her grandmother baked the day before and handed it to Ider. "Sniff, sniff." Ider's tail started to wag as he looked up at the cookie, drooling. "This smells just like the cookies Mother would bring me back from the land of humans." He sprung up and grabbed the cookie, gulping it down without even chewing. "They're so good, I bet they could even tame a dragon." He reminded Aunt of a dog she had when she was very small, which made her smile. "Come on, we have to hurry to the Pitnet Mountains. The dragon lives on the only known location that grows the Rotellid flower, the main ingredient of the potion that can cure the Queen. The problem is..." Ider's eyes teared up once again. "It's the most dangerous place in Savnak. The mountains border the land between the Knee and Resair. There's always some stupid war going on between us over who owns the mountains. You never know who you're going to run into up there. Unfortunately, Mother, she..." Ider turned away, taking a few steps towards the mountains. "Who cares? Danger or not, we have to do this. For the Queen! For the ring! Let's go!" Ider took Aunt's hand and started to tread up the hill towards the mountain in the distance. "Just ahead is the only village we will pass where we can grab any supplies we need for the trip. After that, we'll just need luck, and that we can't buy." He picked up the pace, and Aunt started to feel the weight of her family on her shoulders. Is this what her grandmother died for? Could she even trust Ider? Even though her grandmother's notes held a lot of information, she still had twice as many questions. As the two approached the village, Aunt started to hear the sounds and the hustle and bustle of the city, but with more growling and barking. Though she wasn't fluent in Nevish, Aunt could still recognize a few words here and there as the sellers behind each stall gave their pitch. The smells of this foreign land also started to catch her attention as they got deeper into the commotion. Her stomach grumbled. Aunt grabbed a bread bun filled with raw grattage paste and a coffee to go. She was starting to feel the lack of sleep as the hours passed, and this was just what she needed as they browsed the market. She was also sucked into a few tourist traps, which included a few souvenirs, local fruits, and the purchase of a treasure map that Ider teased her for falling for. "There's no way that treasure exists," he insisted between giggles. "They just targeted you because you're a human." Despite his attempts to appear clever, he was also very excited to go on any adventure with his new friend, scam or not. They left the village with a stuffed bag full of goodies and a smile on their faces as they shared the experience of a fun morning of shopping. As they walked towards the mountains, Aunt realized they had a more serious adventure ahead of them, and her smile grew to an enormous grin. This was the adventure she had been waiting for her entire life. It felt like every acre of land had a story to tell, and even though Aunt wasn't sure if Ider was telling the truth, she still enjoyed his company. The farther away from the village they went, the more creatures she noticed lurking behind the shadows. "Don't worry," Ider announced, noticing Aunt's discomfort. "They won't dare attack us as long as my eyes glow red." He held his head high and walked ahead as if he had a boost of confidence. Aunt meant to pick up a small sword and shield in the village, but it slipped her mind. Luckily, the plants of Savnak held some curious-shaped sticks and bark that could easily be carved into something useful. Aunt kept an eye out, picking up and examining potential weapons on the way. "Here we are," Ider said as they arrived at the foot of the mountain and darting into the entrance of a small cave. "This should be a good place to stop for the night." "Boo!" "A ghost," Ider whispered, looking at Aunt wide-eyed. "Boo!" The ghost's eyes darted. I guess? Ant and Idea looked at each other, both confused and relieved. I'm sorry, did I disappoint you? The ghost asked, looking apologetic. I would introduce myself, but I don't remember my name. You can call me Ghost. I was looking for my body so I could pass on to the afterlife, but I can't remember how I died. For all I know, I could be ancient.
We're headed up to Pitnep. Do you think your body is up there? Ider asked. Loads of people die up there every day.
They do?
Ghost looked both delighted and terrified.
Then why are you going?
Ider gathered nearby leaves to sleep on while Ant carved her stick and bark into a more suitable set. Once they got comfortable, they told Ghost all about the Queen, falling asleep mid-story. The three headed off at the first light in the morning, enjoying some filled bread buns they picked up at the village the day before. Everyone except Ghost. Unable to eat because of the whole being dead thing, Ghost watched two enjoy breakfast as glowing drool dripped from their mouth, leaving a trail of ectoplasm behind them. This made both Ant and Ider uncomfortable, resulting in them downing their bread much faster than they had hoped. They continued up the mountain while sharing stories and fun facts about their worlds. It almost felt like fiction to each of them. They couldn't believe a whole other world was out there. Yet, there they were. It felt like just minutes had passed, but really they had been walking and chatting for hours without even noticing. They were the perfect match to keep each other company while on an adventure. Ant was starting to get hungry for lunch and took out some of the local fruits to try. The shape and color was unlike any edible fruit she had ever seen. She bit into it with a crunch. It was somehow both crispy and soft at the same time. It was sweet, but not too sweet. It had a bit of a tang to it, making her mouth water instantly. She turned to offer Ider a bite, but which one was Ider? Why were there three Ider, huh? Ant? Are you...
Ider asked Ant, stopping her from falling over.
Are you...
Ghost asked. Ant felt dizzy when suddenly everything went black. Ant was shaken awake, and when she opened her eyes, everything was more white than usual, as if she were looking outside of a foggy window. She tried to sit up, but hit her head on something strange and almost soft. Rubbing her eyes, she noticed she was moving, and when she looked around, she saw a face. It was a ghost. And she was inside them. She barely heard Ider explain. They came to a sudden halt. Ant thought she was going to be returned to land, but Ghost wasn't opening up. She started to get worried as the fuzzy figure of Ider transformed back into his original form and started growling and barking at Ghost. No, she's tasty, Ghost muffled. Ant drew the small sword she crafted out of her bag and stabbed at the inside of Ghost. Oh! Ghost shouted, then disappeared with a poof. The Reseer found us by following Ghost Drool, and he offered to carry you to escape, Ider explained, turning back into his humanoid form and looking back behind them nervously. Looks like Ghost was on their side. Hurry, we have to keep moving. Ant wiped off the ectoplasm and hastily joined Ider, continuing up the mountain where she caught a glimpse of the dragon as it flew around the peak of the mountain. The higher they climbed, the colder the air became. Ant was now keeping her sword and shield in hand, just in case the Reseer were still on their tails and had a sneak attack planned. She wasn't going to be caught off guard again. The size of the dragon started to sink in as Ant watched it get closer and closer as they approached the peak. It looked so small in the distance, flying around the mountain as if a miniature model, and seeing it up close had her worried. Every so often it would fly directly above them, casting a dark shadow that blocked the sun entirely for a few seconds. Ider guided them along as they became much more stealthy in their climb, making sure to wait until the dragon had passed to make their next move between large rocks, staying in the shadows when they could. They knew it would be impossible to avoid the dragon altogether, as the field of retellid flowers were at the top of the mountain in clear view, but the longer they avoided the attention, the better. The wide, comfortable path of solid rock had slowly become much more narrow, full of smaller rocks that made it easier for them to fall. At one point, Ant's foot slipped, causing a rock the size of her head to go tumbling noisily down the mountainside. She started to sweat nervously, which didn't help her grasp on the mountain. Approaching the last stretch until the peak of the mountain, they couldn't help but notice the dragon stopped making its rounds. This could either be great news or very bad news. Maybe it was hungry and decided to fly down to grab a quick meal. Or maybe it was lurking in the shadows of the mountain, waiting to make them their meal. Ant laid low as Ida peered over the ledge into the field of flowers to make sure there was absolutely no sign of the dragon. If the coast was clear, they would be able to hop up, grab a few flowers, and then head down the mountain. The whole kingdom would celebrate as the queen became herself once again, accepting Ida for who he was, living happily ever after. It wasn't. Ida flinched, and in the blink of an eye, his coat changed into a bright red and his eyes faded to a bright white, letting out a roar that had her question her safety. Ant's eyes filled with tears as she watched the dragon bite into little Ida's neck and toss him to the side with no effort at all. Ida grew in size when he transformed into a dragon, but he still wasn't big enough to challenge a full-grown dragon to that magnitude. Ant was afraid he was fighting a losing battle. Grandmother, what would she have done? Had she ever come face to face with this dragon? Wait, Suddenly the dragon spouted something black in Ida's direction. Ant held up her shield as drops landed around her with a sizzle, causing the rock to boil and char. Suddenly her shield caught on fire, which made her realize if she was going to survive, she needed a plan. But first, she needed shelter. She hopped up onto the ledge and headed for a cluster of rocks when she noticed the flowers. It was now or never. With the dragon distracted, Ant ran into the field and picked as many as she could and put them into the bottles in her backpack for safekeeping. She turned towards the rocks when Ida's limp body landed in front of her, causing the ground to shake. The dragon landed shortly after with his back towards Ant, as if he hadn't noticed her. Ida wasn't moving and she had to act fast if she was going to save him. Without even thinking, she jumped into the dragon's back and there was a roar. Without even thinking, she jumped onto the dragon's back. There was a roar and the next thing she knew, she was being taken for a ride around the mountain. Ant held on as the dragon wiggled through the air in a fit of rage, trying to buck Ant off. She slowly inched her way up the dragon's neck, grasping onto its scales. As they rounded the peak of the mountain, Ant got a glimpse of injured Ida, who had now returned to his original fox-like form, except for his eyes, which remained white. This only motivated her to fight harder. She worked her way to the dragon's head, where she saw its piercing eyes glaring at her, spitting black gunk every which way. She paid close attention to the pattern of his inhaling just before an attack, and took the opportunity. With one of her grandmother's cookies in hand, she tossed it towards the dragon's mouth, hoping he would accidentally catch it. Gulp! The dragon closed its mouth just as the cookie passed its fangs. Its eyes widened, suddenly stopping in its tracks. Floating in place for several seconds, the dragon then softly landed on the field of flowers next to Ida. Ant jumped off before the dragon could even lower his head and scooped Ida up in her arms.
What is the secret ingredient to those cookies? The dragon demanded, licking its lips. I'll do anything for the recipe! Ant looked down at Ida, then back at the dragon, nodding. The dragon dropped Ant and Ida off in front of the cave of Knee within minutes. Ant gave the dragon her grandmother's cookie recipe, thanking him for the quick return, then rushing into the cave with Ida in her arms. Ducking under the large door as they began to open, Ant darted towards the advisor, flowers in one hand and Ida in the other. The guards didn't like this quick and hasty approach, drawing their weapons on her with warning, relaxing when the advisor stepped up and took the flowers and Ida into a room behind the queen's throne. Ant waited, standing awkwardly in front of the queen as she threw her fit. The guards were staring at her so intently she felt like she didn't belong when there was a sudden crash and Ida came rushing towards Ant, the red glow back in his eyes and tackling her to the ground and licking her face. The advisor climbed onto the queen's throne and just managed to drop some of the flower concoction into her mouth, instantly bringing her back to her normal self. Thank you, the queen said with a bow. I am both grateful and ever so sorry about your grandmother. She was my favorite human. The advisor walked up to Ant holding a small ink sprout. Just before she grabbed the tip, Ida took hold of her hand with a hopeful smile that Ant returned. She grabbed the sprout, and with a blink, she was holding the tip of the sprout that was in her grandmother's room. She replaced the floorboard and pushed the bed back to where it belonged, just as her father entered, sipping on coffee.
Morning, Ant.
He noticed Ida in his fox-like form trotting over to him with a ripe savnak fruit in his mouth, doubling as a souvenir and a bribe to win him over. Ida crocked his head and dropped the fruit at his feet, wagging his tail.
Aw, can we keep them?
The end. I hope you guys enjoyed my Inktober story, and with that, stay golden and good night.